Welcome to I'm on a Nonprofit Board. Now what? The legal governance lowdown for nonprofit board members and leaders, so you can come to the table ready to lead. Whether you are new to a nonprofit board or have been serving for years, this information will help you confidently take your seat at the board table and continue to make a positive impact in our community. Powered by attorney volunteers, Pro Bono Partnership of Ohio strengthens our community by providing free business legal services and education to nonprofits. Links to more information about us and to additional resources on this topic are at the end of this presentation. Keeping house. Policies every nonprofit needs. In this session, we'll review 3 policies that every nonprofit should consider adopting and why. But first, what is a policy? A policy is a guideline for how a nonprofit should operate. It can help a nonprofit improve board and staff performance by clearly defining roles and responsibilities, provide continuity when there's a change in board members or staff, and help avoid legal problems that can drain an organization's limited resources. Policies protect your nonprofit and the board, and each policy should be customized to meet your nonprofit's unique situation. Additionally, the Internal Revenue Service takes the position that a well-governed charity is more likely to obey tax laws, safeguard charitable assets, and serve charitable interests than one with poor or lax governance. To that end, the IRS requires that tax-exempt public charities file an annual informational return with them called the Form 990. On the Form 990, the IRS asks whether an organization has 3 specific policies in place. Although not required by law, the IRS thinks they are important enough to single them out on the Form 990. Following their lead, these are the 3 policies we are going to focus on today. First, we'll start with a conflict of interest policy. What is a conflict of interest, and why do we need a policy covering it? As you learned in Session 1, board members have a legal fiduciary duty to put the nonprofit's interests above their own. If a board member's obligation to further the nonprofit's charitable purposes is at odds with their own self-interests, that is a conflict of interest. The most common conflict is a financial conflict. For example, when a nonprofit considers hiring a board member's company for services, that board member has a conflict of interest. Let's say that your nonprofit is hiring a new employee, and a board member's son is considered for the job. That board member has a conflict of interest. And what if your nonprofit has information on prospective donors, and a certain board member sits on another nonprofit board that would benefit from that same information? Your board member has a conflict of interest. Board members are often asked to join a board because of their connections and relationships with businesses and the larger community. So it's almost inevitable that at some point, your board will have to address a conflict of interest situation. And a conflict of interest is not always a bad thing. For example, maybe the board member's son that you are thinking of hiring is a well-known expert in his field, and his mom's connection to your nonprofit helps to attract and retain his talent. Perhaps the board member's company that you're considering hiring agrees to provide its services for a lowered rate because of his connection to you. Ultimately, your role as a board is to ensure that your organization has a process for how it will address an actual or perceived conflict of interest when one predictably comes up. And what's the best way to make sure your nonprofit takes a consistent and effective approach in addressing conflicts? A policy. A conflict of interest policy is arguably the most important policy a board can adopt. It outlines a process for disclosures of potential and actual conflicts of interest, and lists the steps the board should take when addressing them. Here's how it works in real life. Each year, board members should sign a statement that they understand and will comply with the conflict of interest policy and disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest. Disclosure just entails listing any relationships, positions you hold, or other circumstances you think are conflicts or could develop into a conflict of interest. The board reviews everyone's disclosures and keeps a list. When a situation arises where a conflict may exist, the board then follows the process outlined in its policy. This should include an open discussion among board members, the use of comparability data and a vote by the remaining board members, if applicable, and documentation of the process and decision by the board. What can happen if a nonprofit does not manage its conflicts of interest? The organization and its board members can be held accountable by the Ohio Attorney General for failing to fulfill their legal duties. In certain circumstances, individual board members and the organization could also face financial penalties from the IRS, and the organization could risk losing its tax-exempt status. Let's turn to the second recommended policy, a document retention and destruction policy. This policy outlines how your organization consistently manages its documents, including electronic files, voicemails, emails, and storage in cloud-based systems. The goal is to ensure everyone in the organization is consistent in what they keep and for how long, and consistent in what they delete as part of your organization's routine business practices. Why is this so important? To begin with, the federal government considers it a crime to destroy documents in anticipation of litigation or investigation. A written policy that outlines consistent retention and destruction timelines helps demonstrate that any action taken by the organization was part of a clear and scheduled timeline for managing documents. Additionally, the implementation and use of this type of policy is part of a board's basic fiduciary duty of care. Keep in mind that there is no one-size-fits-all policy. Things to consider for your organization's document retention and destruction policy include state law, the types of documents your nonprofit generates, and the length of time during which specific legal claims could be made against the nonprofit. For example, while a nonprofit's governing documents should be kept permanently, its receipts from a fundraising raffle may only need to be kept a certain number of years. From a practical standpoint, most nonprofits can relate to feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of emails, files, and other documents that are amassed and added to every day. A document retention and destruction policy that fits the unique needs of your nonprofit can help control that stress by creating an organized and automatic approach to document management. Finally, we recommend nonprofits have a whistleblower policy. Federal law prohibits an organization from retaliating against anyone that reports its illegal acts, improper use of assets, or violations of policies or ethical duties. These individuals are referred to as whistleblowers. A whistleblower policy outlines how and to whom individuals should report potential misconduct, ensures confidentiality, and appoints responsibility for investigating the report. In addition to helping an organization comply with the law, a policy can protect whistleblowers from illegal retaliation, negative actions taken against them in response to their complaints. Adopting a whistleblower policy signals to both internal and external stakeholders that your nonprofit is willing to hear complaints, values transparency, and holds itself accountable. To recap, the three policies that every nonprofit should consider adopting include a conflict of interest policy, a document retention and destruction policy, and a whistleblower policy. Keep in mind that your nonprofit should talk with legal counsel to consider whether additional policies are also appropriate based on your program, size, and needs to help you manage legal risk and bolster good governance practices. Pro Bono Partnership of Ohio is here to help. We regularly assist organizations with drafting and reviewing policies, and our legal help is free. See below to see if you qualify for our services and to fill out our simple request for legal services today.